Do you see these two books here? That's Hegel's Aesthetic, volumes 1 and 2, of Deutsch and German, are published in the GDR. And I recently picked them up again to read the chapters on Egypt because I was curious to remember again and recollect why Hegel saw in Egypt really the crucial beginning where spirit, human spirit, at least to some extent, comes into its own. It doesn't fully unfold and it remains an enigma to itself, as we shall see, but this is where everything sets in. This is where human spirit really begins to unfold, and we shall see why. In his lectures on the philosophy of art, or rather on how spirit fulfills itself and comes to itself in and through art, and how we can trace this coming to be in artworks, Hegel writes that ancient Egypt is the land of the symbol. Egypt is where human spirit truly marks its beginning. We shall see why and how. It has everything to do with the magic power of the human spirit, which the Egyptians really first got into, which Egyptians first developed, you could say. We know Hegel's lecture series today, of course, under the title Aesthetics, but it was philosophy of art originally, and this may suggest that his thought here addresses issues of contemporary aesthetic theory to do with perception or standards of taste and superficial beauty. The public title of Hegel's lectures are a bit of a deflection, I should say, from their true scope. What Hegel is here after is how spirit unfolds yonder of ordinary consciousness, and how it does so historically, and how it comes to itself precisely through Kunst, through art, through that which is artifice, not of nature hence, but dirempted from it, if I may use that term here, self-split from nature, sublated from it. If you are interested in a bit of a longer lecture of mine on Hegel's aesthetics, just type into YouTube search Niederhauser, Hegel, aesthetics, and you shall find it. I think it's about a 30-minute video, which just brings together an introduction really to what the project is all about. But here we'll just focus on Hegel and Egypt, but also a bit of the phenomenology of spirit, and you will learn a few things about what Hegel means by spirit. So let's continue. Before we turn to Egypt, symbolism and what Hegel sees in it, a very brief detour through Geist, through spirit, that's the word I shall use, as Hegel outlines its unfolding in the preface to his phenomenology of spirit. And this should help us understand better how spirit begins to come into its own in Egypt. Vice versa, Hegel's thoughts on Egypt should help elucidate his perhaps more abstract passages in the preface of the phenomenology. At the risk, of course, of oversimplifying matters, spirit comes into itself, and you can observe this with your own self, with your own self-consciousness and self-awareness, precisely in moments of negation or negativity. It is when you say no to a situation, to someone, let's say, it is then that you begin to take yourself out of the immediately given. This need not be always the case, but it may very well be a moment of freedom, of earning for yourself your own existence. So consider the following passage from the preface on death, which already leads us, I think, deep into Egypt's unique accomplishments. Here a long quote from Hegel. Beauty, powerless and helpless, hates understanding, because the latter exacts from it what it cannot perform. But the life of spirit is not one that shuns death and keeps clear of destruction. It endures death, and in death maintains its being. It only wins to its truth when it finds itself utterly torn asunder. It is this mighty power, not by being a positive which turns away from the negative, as when we say of anything it is nothing or it is false, and being then done with it, pass off to something else. On the contrary, spirit, Geist, is this power only by looking the negative in the face and dwelling with it. This dwelling beside it is the magic power that converts the negative into being. Do we not understand Egypt symbolically as the land of death, with its mortuary practices and cults surrounding the mummy, that sacred vessel that binds afterlife in this life? For Hegel, The life of spirit, the life in which spirit begins to come into itself from simple consciousness, that is to say, awareness of oneself is separate from the world, as subject as opposed to object. That is the life that through dwelling with the most radical negativity, which we know in the form of death, comes to see the world not as alien, but as product of itself. Subject and object become one. Society, history, culture are the products of spirit and mind, of Geist. Consciousness, let's just say it briefly, is a more immediate or intermediate step. It's a path towards spirit. Spirit comprises the whole. And Hegel sees precisely in ancient Egypt and its art the significant first step on the trajectory of spirit's totality. What then is it that ancient Egypt accomplished? And how is Egypt the land of the symbol? We think of the pyramid and, of course, the hieroglyphs. What does Hegel see in Egypt? Hegel sees in it the culture that gave itself the, as he says, geistige, the spiritual task, or the task of the mind, of the self-deciphering of spirit, without, however, actually ever arriving at that deciphering. So it gives itself the task of self-deciphering itself, but it doesn't fully ever really do that, put it simply. And we shall see that the Sphinx is emblematic of this. Thus, spirit here awakens to itself, gives itself the task to decipher itself, but does not yet do so, given the monumental task, of course, this is. So it's, we can't blame the Egyptians for it, that's not the point. But we can't fully arrive at self-decoding, at making itself transparent to itself, at recognizing the world as a product of itself, and also to take it to full, complete human and divine form and to ideal beauty. That is not what we find in Egypt. According to Hegel, we today have the historical task, we as humans of spirit, of intellect, of mind, if you prefer, to decipher, that's what we have to do today, that which has remained undeciphered by spirit in Egyptian art and symbolism. But how does spirit arrive at that moment here in the first place? By negating the immediacy of everyday existence. Now, you could also say by negating the very givenness of everyday life. You go about your day and you don't really question what you do. You just have to do certain things. So Hegel refers to this, put it very simply, as immediacy. Unmittelbarkeit. There's no mediation. And mediation begins through simple negation. That's the first step. So the task for the men of intellect, or let's say for the humans of the age of spirit, which according to Hegel is us, is to follow the negativity of spirit itself, which already in ancient Egypt concretized for itself the absolute in its freedom as negativity. In doing so, spirit recognizes itself and completes itself further and finds in ancient Egypt's art and symbolism an expression of itself. So that's also the point why we have to engage in this, according to Hegel, is to recognize also in ancient Egypt human spirit and hence complete the circle, to recognize it also as a product of the human spirit and hence complete the whole for us. So the notion of Egypt as the land of the symbol means that here art, however, is not yet fully objective. So let's consider what symbol means for Hegel. Objectivity for Hegel means independence from the elements that make up an object. The stone used for a statue or temple is then sublated. The marble used for a statue of Athena or the veiled Christ in San Severo in Naples disappears in the statue. It also means that inner spiritual idea and outer physical form match. But that is not the case in Egypt. So it remains symbolic. It doesn't become objective art. So its art remains symbolic as spirit tries to emerge from nature but remains to itself a riddle or enigma. Even though spirit here begins to come into its own, it does not yet express itself with clarity. remains to some extent concealed from itself, which is why the symbolism of Egypt is an eternal riddle, and remains so even to the ancient Egyptians themselves, as Hegel points out. By symbol, Hegel means a sign that has as its meaning not what it immediately depicts, but that portrays a generality related to it. The symbol, however, remains somewhat confused, as just outlined. There remains a distinction between visible image and intellectual content. A symbol always points at some more concrete meaning, but as it remains external, it strives beyond itself. As we shall see, the Sphinx is emblematic of this. The contents of the divine and the human here are still conceived abstractly, and thus no ideal human form can be made visible in their artworks and is not made visible, and indeed the gods are not depicted also in ideal human form, as are the Greek gods, and as Hegel argues, also Jesus Christ, who is God in human form. Now, I would disagree with this, of course, because Jesus Christ is not ideal human form. He's never depicted as such, and also the depiction of him as such, as the suffering Christ, etc., is a form of idolatry, but that is for another time to discuss. Anyway, another form of beauty, of course, for Hegel is the depiction of free human life. If you think of the great Dutch painters, for example, but this is also lacking in ancient Egypt. Yeah, even though there would have been enough examples. So that to Hegel is not depicted. Free human life, that is also an ideal form of beauty for Hegel. Thus, Egypt is not a case of ideal beauty, or indeed beauty at all. There's no beauty in any of their works, according to Hegel. Egypt remains, even again to itself, an enigma, because spirit, just to reiterate this again, is still confused about itself despite its achievements. Hence, there is a kind of unclarity in the language, as Hegel attests, which is in turn an expression of their unclarity about themselves. We look at them through a mirror brightly, for Hegel, through the mirror of fully self-recognized spirit, which is us, and thus we are in the position to decipher how spirit here begins. The Egyptians are, argues Hegel, the first true artistic people, however. In all senses of the word, they produce artworks, and they also negate nature. They sublate nature, and in doing so, hence erect an artificial landscape. The Egyptian spirit, or rather spirit in Egypt, produces for visual intuition or for visual perception, for Anschauung, for that which can be looked at, but not for thought. That's where the not is. Anyways, even though spirit here sets in, its own true inner life, again, remains concealed for itself. Instead, spirit looks for clarification about itself in expressions of art, in the visual and sensual, but fails to do so in thought, and that is its shortcoming, which of course the Greeks will accomplish first in philosophy, in the thinking of thinking. The monuments we are familiar with, the pyramids, the temples, statues, the artificial channels of the Nile, the artificial lakes even, are for Hegel ultimately a product of a creative spirit that does not become fully transparent to itself, yet through its violent erection of monuments and through its infinite variety, this spirit attempted to advance to itself and reach for itself, but this it can't do. Despite these only apparent shortcomings, spirit here again takes a decisive step, a necessary step, and no one should expect to come to itself fully in only one. No one should expect of spirit to come to itself in only one culture. You see, it requires the entire movement of the history of spirit. So as opposed to Indian culture, here the interior, quote from Hegel, is held fast again against the immediacy of existence. And he continues, the inner as a negative of vitality as the dead. So to spell this out, the inner is the dead, that which negates life, that is the immediately given of everyday existence. Let's put it like this. Hegel continues, here the negative is here understood not as evil or pernicious, hence, quote, not as merely the abstract negation, but in concrete Gestalt itself, or in concrete form. The inner is spirit awakening to itself, understanding itself as a negation to life, hence as what is dead. This is more concrete for Hegel because it is a starker difference than assuming an abstract good versus evil in the form of two opponents, for example. More concrete it is because it requires an affirmation of the negation, as it were. You see? Spirit splits, so it's not just evil is not just some negation of the good. That the abstract initial negation is then also confirmed or affirmed, and hence we're already on a higher level. And we shall see where this takes them. Spirit splits itself from the outer world and brings forth for itself an interiority or inwardness that is dead, however, that is in some sense the death of the outside, hence it's dead. This is why Egyptian symbolism of death is not just vain abstraction or sheer nothingness as we encounter in Nirvana, for example. Instead, it is content of what is alive, as continuous negation of the immediate of life. Thus, this depicts spirit's self-acquisition, even if not yet in its full concrete freedom. Quote, knowing oneself, however, is the principle of freedom, as Hegel argues. This self-knowing is still foreign to the Egyptian spirit, but we can witness spirit here being on the way there, if you like. The Egyptians had not yet penetrated to the concept of the free spirit, Hegel says. Still, they dwell with the utmost negative, that is death, and thus bring about the separation of spirit from world. Now, that is their main achievement. This very separation must, of course, ultimately also again be overcome, so that we arrive at a mediated immediacy, or spirit recognizing culture, society, art as its product through differentiation. The separation between this life and an afterlife is a crucial step for consciousness to come into its own. It is symbolic of the separation or split consciousness must make from immediate existence towards full freedom. Here Hegel sees a quote separation from the natural and the spiritual. Das Geistige, so the natural and the spiritual or the intellectual, they split here. The achievement of Egyptian spirit is thus, or of spirit in Egypt, is thus the separation from immediate life, so that a crucial step towards the liberation of consciousness can be taken. Of course, spirit must come to naturalness as well and cannot alienate itself absolutely from nature. This is a misunderstanding of Hegel. The negation of nature must be negated also, so we return back to nature because we are natural beings, but now as free beings. You can think of this in terms of, let's say, you negate base desires for the sake of achieving a higher consciousness or awareness of yourself, but you negate your initial negation of your natural urges as well, so you come back to nature, to your own nature changed, to your own physicality, your own body, etc. changed. It changed insofar as that you can now sort of, let's just say, deal with your base desires in a way that they don't drive you, so that reason is not a slave of the passions, as David Hume claimed. Through separating from the immediately given of everyday life, but remaining on the level of visual perception, the Egyptian mind brings forth an independent realm, a state of the invisible. You see, that's what they do. As Hegel says, and there's echoes of which can still be found today, just to mention, when we mistakenly assume Plato dreamt of an invisible realm of ideas. In the Egyptian invisible state, Osiris is as Amanthus' eternal judge. So the invisible is at the same time, of course, envisioned by the imagination by them. This is the work of the imagination, not of thought. So the imagination is strangely more abstract than what we might consider abstract or imageless thought. It's more abstract, and precisely because it is so abstract, it cannot concretize itself than in beautiful art. In Egypt, the visual, the imaginal, and the imaginary remain at the forefront, bringing about their own kinds of abstractions. This split of inner and outer is reflected in their art, in their monumental buildings, temples, secret hallways, and of course, especially in their pyramids, which, quote, harbor within themselves an interiority invisible to the outer. The pyramids especially, which on the one hand depict crystals, but which are on the other hand entirely sublated from, quote, mere naturalness, by their very geometric form, are mirrors of how the imagination envisions a realm of the dead in distinction from everyday life. The pyramid is there only for its concealed interiority and thus for death. Its split between inner meaning and outer appearance leave it firmly in the symbolic order. The pyramid merely points to a certain significance or implies it, but does not capture or conceptualize the full meaning. Hence, there is no harmony between inner and outer, as in fully objective art, which classical Greece accomplished. The pyramid is, quote, outer form and shell. The pyramid hides within itself, quote, free and living spirit still, yet it does not itself become an expression thereof. That is the point. So the pyramid is this harbor, this concealed harbor of free and living spirit, but it doesn't itself become an expression of it. So this split remains, and this is the enigma that the ancient Egyptians, according to Hegel, struggle with for millennia. They remain to themselves a riddle. Nevertheless, the pyramid is a realm of death and of the invisible, and is therefore truly art. Here art and religion are unified still in expressing the divine and truth. Its outer form is still necessary insofar as it depicts a transgression of the simply natural, granting a realm of death, is symbolic for absolute negativity, and thus is of a realm of freedom already. Yet even though an interiority is assumed, it remains hollow, or simply put, dead. According to Hegel, in Egypt, quote, the interiority of subjectivity is still outside itself. So there is a subjectivity assumed, an innerness, but it is outside itself. Now, what does that mean? And thus it cannot develop itself to its own free beauty. The statues of ancient Egypt, the Memnons, for example, are not beautiful as is, for example, Neheh, or is a statue of Athena, or similar. So that is to say, subjectivity does not become true substance here, to try to be very close to Hegel's language. It continues to have mediation outside itself. So subjectivity becoming substance means it has it is onto itself. It is capable of initiating something from within itself, from its own inner freedom. There is an inkling of subjectivity, but it is captured in purely exterior terms. The innerness or inwardness is not genuine interiority of human subjectivity. Hegel sees Memnons as symbolic for the still exterior nature of awakening subjectivity. They are, quote, rigid, stiff, and without life. Hence, the interiority is entirely exterior. We cannot assume, looking at them, an interiority that could just come out of itself, as we can witness with statues of classical Greece, for example. Memnons, in turn, face the sun, so that during dawn, when morning dew warming up from the light of the sun causes statues to give off a sound, as Herodotus describes, that is a symbol for Hegel that what is to be inner is actually caused by something outer. It's the light of the sun that causes this. So the sound that they give off, which could sound as if it was their sound, comes from the outside. So Hegel sees this as purposely done, as purposely symbolically expressing this lack of inwardness, that it must be caused by something else. For Hegel, this symbolizes the Egyptian spirit as a whole, the light coming from the outside, or even meaning of life coming from the outside and enlivening the dead interior. This is in line with how the Egyptians understood life, and let's just say, meaning. It does come for them from the outside, as I learned from Carla, our Egyptologist, and you should take her course, which is linked to in the description of this video. But ironically, if you think about it, New Age interpretations or esoteric, pseudo-esoteric interpretations of Egypt, also, that Egypt was built by aliens. That, of course, is also, ironically, a sort of misunderstanding of what the Egyptians meant by life, etc., coming from the outside. So, in some sense, people who believe this have taken a step back in terms of spiritual awareness. Anyways, in sum, human subjectivity remains silent in Egypt. The human being in Egypt is only ensouled out of a natural moment, as for example by the light of the sun, which brings forth an interior that is not capable to emerge freely and by itself. Hence, Egyptian art remains of an enigmatic symbolism, and its artworks are riddles. But not just any old riddle. Hegel refers to it as the objective riddle or enigma itself, for which the sphinx is the symbol above all, and to this day it is, and it was the Greek spirit that solved its riddle, of course, for the first time. So it is objective riddle itself. That is quite a remarkable thing to say, because it means that it objectifies itself as a riddle to itself, and it reflects back to subjectivity, which I can only take what it has produced as riddle, which then continues to produce more riddles. Hence, as Hegel points out, ancient Egypt, and to this day you can see this in some places, was littered with sphinxes everywhere. And what is the sphinx? The notion of Egyptian art as the objective riddle itself expresses that here subjectivity gets stuck, as it were, as it moves outside itself and objectifies itself, thus only as enigma to itself. The Sphinx is highest expression of exactly this. Its animal bodies, cut from hardest stone, covered in hieroglyphs, as Hegel points out, with human heads which appear to push themselves out of the animal body. This is what they are. From the numb strength, this is Hegel, and force of the animalistic, the human spirit wants to emerge without, however, coming to a complete depiction of its own freedom and moving form. Because here the human spirit remains mixed with parts foreign to it. The Egyptian spirit remains a formidable riddle to itself. There is an urge for high intellectual spiritualness, true human freedom. There is this urge, but it doesn't come to be. But it stands as in its own way. It's objective riddle, and thus the human spirit in its urge becomes riddle to itself. For remember, what is the famous riddle of the Sphinx which Oedipus solves? What goes on 4 feet in the morning, 2 feet in midday, and 3 feet in the evening? That it is the human being aging from cradle to middle age to old age, walking on a stick, using a stick to walk. That, of course, is the riddle that the Sphinx gives to itself, or which it is to itself, because it isn't fully human yet. Which is what spirit here wants to become, but isn't capable of becoming. And so when Oedipus finally answers the question, which the Greek spirit recognized that this is what they were struggling with, the Sphinx, as it were, disappears. The Sphinx's riddle is what it wants to be itself, but cannot become ever. And only with the Greeks does human self-knowledge, hence the principle of freedom, fully enter into history. Know thyself, gnoti seauton. But this could only be done, only be achieved. It is not a mistake on the part of the Egyptians. They didn't fail to do something. Without their initial negation of immediate life, without their focus on death and on the realm of death, without this concealedness in the pyramid, without this enigma to human spirit itself that tries to objectify itself, that tries to then unify subject and object and become, which is what spirit is ultimately, We may not have had Greece. They needed the riddle of the Sphinx to respond to. So, I'd like to invite you, if you're interested in philosophy in all seriousness, you need to have a firm grounding in ancient Egyptian thought. And we have just the course for it at the Halkyon Academy, taught by Carla Berenice Groh, international lady of mystery, an art dealer, and residing in New York and in Florida, and also a trained archaeologist and Egyptologist, is teaching a course at the Halkyon Academy on the Egyptian mind, beginning with hieroglyphs and ending with crisis literature, 6 lectures in total. And it gives you also the chance to learn about Ma'at and to see what made up their cosmos, but in its own terms, not on our terms, but on their terms. So I invite you again, I implore you to take the course, follow the link in the description, and learn about the Egyptian mind, which according to Hegel is where everything begins. And I think he sees something very crucial here. Thank you.